Good morning. Welcome to Primetime at Bethel University Library. My name is Brian Hyatt. I'm a professor in the biology department. It's my honor to introduce our speakers today. So first, Primetime celebrates learning in and beyond the classroom of Bethel, faculty, students, and staff, and is a collaborative project between the Friends of BU Library, faculty development, and other offices on campus. We're glad you've joined us today, either in person or virtually. Practice your snap and join us in person on Tuesday, May 11th for our last prime time of the season when the students from Angela Shannon's spring poetry writing class read their original work for the Bethel community. So I get to introduce Dr. Teresa DeGolier and Dr. Amy Dykstra, who will be presenting on the green roof. And the green roof's actually over 10 years old, but I was digging through, I'd say files, but I was actually digging through piles in my office and came across an old letter that I got from Bruce Kunkel. If anyone remembers who Bruce was the vice president of campus services here. And it was a letter he sent to an official at the city of Arden Hills. And I'll just read part of this. So the green roof was designated as both a stormwater retention area and a research area for our biology department. Although we really haven't done a whole lot of research. So this is exciting that we actually are now going to get up there and do some more research. And there are policies regarding the use and access to the green roof. So it's for research purposes only, and it will only be allowed if there's a professor present with students. Professors will have access, and no more than 2 professors will have access at any given time. So fortunately, we do not have a group of 3 doing this. Again, it's stated access is only for research purposes. So very clear, that is the only purpose of going up there, except for the last one for maintenance as well. Although, you can get more people up there because number 4 here, groups of students, if accompanied by a professor, will not exceed 15 people. So if you want to get up there, you got to call yourself a student and get in touch with Teresa or Amy. So I'm looking forward to their talk. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Brian. And that's exactly what this is about today. We took a look at what we know about the history of the green roof, what was behind all this, why did Bethel build one, what has happened since its installation almost 13 years ago and now. And then we're biologists, so we were up there curious, just kind of brainstorming, wow, if this was indeed a research setting, what kind of things could we do with other faculty, with collaborative effort for students? So that's what this presentation is about. A lot of it is ideas what to do, and the goal would be to develop these ideas with students. I want to give a special nod to a few people that aren't here. They're busy working on campus activities, all right? Josh Girth is head of grounds, all right? So as far as facilities, he's given us a lot of information of what we already know about the status of the green roof. And then Mike Lindsay gave us some background information. For example, the script that Brian read about who can use this, fortunately, was the holder of that. So we had some history that indeed we have the green light to do research. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to start with the history and background of what we know. So where exactly is the green roof? So if you go down to Brush Arbor Commons by the coffee shop where the egg is, look straight up and you'll see some glass panes. You can see those on the green roof. Up there is the green roof. So just kind of take that oval area and expand it to the equivalent of 3780 square feet, and there's our green roof. If you go to the student loft and look out the garage, you look at the green roof. So a lot of people know we have them, but really, where is it? Because you're always under it. Nobody sees it unless you go to the loft or if you get involved in research. Okay, so it was installed in 2008, and it was part of the city of Arden Hills that said you need to do this as part of wastewater management. And so that was the trigger to do this. Here now will be a 53-second video of the installation. Thanks, Bob Kistler, for putting this together. So the agars, the greenhouse thingy there you see there, the windows are coming out of the loft. And these are the Mickman brothers who are installing. And the trays that they put in, you're going to see them show up in just a minute. These are created by Bachmann's. And so right now, this is a waterproofing layer that you see going on. And now here come the trays. So the whole thing comes set up, and we'll show you what that looks like in more detail in just a minute. But you can see they're actually planting them, and then you'll see the end product. So I don't know how long this actually took, but kind of gives you an idea of the installation. It's like a busy little ant colony. Great, and there it is. And you can kind of see colors, and you can see patterns and swirls, and it was meant to have some aesthetic appeal. All right, so just briefly, what kind of green roof do we have? Because there's actually two types of green roof. We have what's called an extensive green roof, and the amount of soil and the plants you have is really very shallow. It's intended to have very low maintenance. You don't want to water it, you don't want to fertilize it, you basically don't want to do anything to it. Compare this now to what's called an intensive green roof. And it tends to have different purposes as well. But as you can see, the amount of soil is much greater and the weight on top of the building is greater. So the infrastructure building this requires more. But then you're also going to attract a higher biodiversity because you have bigger plants. So you'll bring in birds, small animals, etc. And then there's variations in between. But this is what we have. We have an extensive green roof, mostly with sedum, which is a succulent, and some moss and a few other volunteer plants. Its construction is something like this. This is a template, not necessarily ours, but these are the players that are part of a green roof, your plants of interest, and then a growing medium, and that's proprietary. Most of these are engineered soils. It's just not like grabbing a bag from a store and getting soil. No, they're intended to be light and to have high water absorption capacity. There's a filter so that larger particulates don't work their way down. There is, very importantly, a storage area, and this is kind of like little cups that you see, and this is to collect the rainfall. And that keeps the rainfall in the cups so that the plants can use it for photosynthesis, and it also helps to retard some of the stormwater runoff. Insulation, waterproofing membrane, which is that black strip of plastic that you saw during installation, and then something to help protect the roof. So all of this on the green roof was installed by the Mickman brothers, coming from Bachman's, was only about between 4 to 6 inches. That's what you have. And so when they installed that, bingo, the plants are right there. You need to note that plants were there, not seeds. They actually put in plants. Okay, so this is what it looked like 1 year. 1 year after its planting. So you can see it's a great picture. This is September. Everybody has bloomed already, so you get a lot better sense of color than what you might see in some of our current pictures today. But this is the architect's plan. All right, and this is kind of what we needed to see, because we're going up there and trying to figure out what's actually still there. No one's looked at this for 12 to 13 years. Do we have the same species that were planted? Will we still see these same swirls? So this is the architect's plan. And while you can't read that, that's all right. But up in the upper left-hand corner of that schematic, you'll see 5 blocks that have different types of hash or lines or what have you. Those are little groups. So within each of those are 3 to 5 different types of species. And so you have group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5. And we can figure out what was planted. We know what species were planted, and we know where they were planted. So that helps set the stage for us. Who is actually there now? Up until, from its installation till now, what has been done? Very little. According to Josh Gerth from Grounds, they do mow it once a year. They didn't mow it this year. We asked them not to. We just need to see what's there. And that would just kind of be to get rid of any weeds or some of the dead stalks from sedum flowers and just let that mulch go back in. So they have not done that this year. Weeding is very minimal. There are a few volunteers that are showing up that we'll mention. Basically, don't do anything with water or fertilizing. The idea was to be self-sustainable. And then every other year, they do a soil sample analysis that they send out to a place called Harris Labs. And it gives us things like what's the pH of the soil, because that's really important for plants, because the proper pH helps the positive charged minerals to be exchanged with into a plant. So all these parameters right here make sure that the minerals that are in the soil are able to make it up to the plant. Because once they're transported to the plant, then water follows. And then we can send this to the leaves, who are the factories of the plant.
So now it's my turn. What we've been doing is we've just been going out there since middle of March, since the weather got kind of warm enough and since the plants started kind of showing up. And so like Dr. DeGolier said, this is the view from September of 2009, and this was the view yesterday. And so different time of the year, and so we're not seeing some of these yellows in, because they haven't flowered yet. But this is kind of what it's currently look like. So our green roof is, the first thing we've learned is that our green roof is alive and well. And we want to learn a little bit more about what species are doing well, what species maybe are not doing so well. This is kind of a time series of what we've seen as we've been going out on the roof. Oh, I do want to just kind of orient you to where we are, and maybe we could see it here a little bit better. So that that set of windows, you know, the skylight above the egg, that is right here. And so we're taking this picture looking towards the lake. And so if you were in the Brush Harbor Commons and you were going to go out to that new patio, out that door to that new patio, this is looking the same direction. So this is kind of a time series of what we've seen develop over the last month or so. And started out, most of the plants were really red, and we started to see a little green, but most of the green that you see in this picture and this picture here, these early pictures, most of that green really is mosses. And that was kind of one of the surprises to me, is that there's a lot of moss up there. And perhaps we're not sure if that was part of what they intentionally planted. And I was just kind of surprised because it's kind of a sun-baked place, and you don't think of moss as growing well in a high sun environment. So we've seen a lot of moss, especially kind of filling in some of the areas where maybe the sedum is not doing as well. So for example, up on this, I'll point first for those who are watching the video online, up in this area here, maybe it's just most effective to point with this pointer, and then kind of here, some of that is showing up, but you can see even in this most recent picture, there's not much sedum growing in some of these places, and especially up in this area, and we don't have a close-up picture of that in our presentation, but that's mostly just moss now instead of actually sedum. So we're kind of interested in which species are doing well, which species aren't, and we're kind of looking, as Teresa said, we're looking for colors. We're kind of looking for those swirls and patterns in the original design. And we are hopefully going to be able to identify the different species that are up there. And we've noticed that there are differences in the types of leaves. Some leaves are nice and thick, like you would expect for a succulent. Some of them have kind of ridged edges, so it's kind of a taxonomist stream, I guess. Boring for everybody else. Okay, so what else has made its way up there? Lots of mosses, as we said. We just have a question mark because we're not really sure if they were originally there or not. Some grasses. I think this little guy here is a tree seedling. One fun thing for me is these mosses have all been in their reproductive stage. So if you are a sort of a plant taxonomist geek, you know that this green part is the gametophyte generation, and these brown stalks that are sticking up, that's the sporophyte generation, and that's how they actually reproduce. And we can also see in this picture, I guess we don't see in this picture was meant to highlight kind of that tree seedling and the moss, but we've also seen some wood sorrel, some oxalis, which looks a little bit like a four-leaf clover, but different. And we've seen some dandelions, which are Taraxacum genus, and this might be a populus, i.e. cottonwood or aspen. So why do people put in green roofs? Is this me or you? Yes, this is Teresa.
Why do people put in green roofs? We had just have a list, and I looked on several references of different types of green roofs, intensive versus extensive. Well, why do they put them in? We've kind of hinted at already. Bethel was asked to put one in by the city of Arden Hills for stormwater management, and which is kind of interesting here because we like to believe that most of the water is used by the plants. It does drain out, and it does end up going into Lake Vandaltime. So it doesn't really affect city stormwater management, but certainly if we were downtown New York or something like that where we're just flooded with green roofs, they could actually help take some of the stress off of the stormwater management.
Can I say something about that?
Yes.
So just one other thing about the stormwater management is this building, Brush Harbor Commons, was put in a place where there was soil. And there was grass, and there was vegetation that could absorb that. And so part of the idea of putting a green roof is to kind of replace what you have removed in order to build your building.
Other possibilities, and again, as we go through these, we realize a lot of these we can't necessarily measure with our green roof, but part of this idea is to brainstorm, can we actually measure some of these things? It's thought that green roofs provide some illustration. Plants, of course, they're very illustrative, right? But provide some insulation, thank you. Of course, they absorb solar energy for photosynthesis, but they also transpire through evaporative water loss in order to pull fluids from the ground into the plant. So they do have a cooling effect. Maybe we'd be able to measure that from surface temperatures on the green roof versus an adjacent roof that's just stone tar. What is it? Probably has the biggest effect, again, when you're in a large city with a lot of green roofs, and then you kind of reduce that heat island type effect, and that has actually been measurable. Maybe it would save money. Okay, absorption of UV rays, which would be a little bit wear and tear on a building, and maybe even sound absorptions. Those are possibilities that people have looked at. As far as polluting air particles, the point there is more about, well, green roofs are a sink for carbon dioxide because plants need that and they produce it, and they would be a source of oxygen. So again, one small green roof, how much of a dent does that make? But again, in a large scale, especially when you have some of these intensive green roofs, like in New York, with trees on tops of skyscrapers, if you will, it might make a difference. Goal, of course, then on all these would be, could you extend the life of the roof as well? And of course, the aesthetics is a nice piece. There's nothing wrong with that, making a place look nice. But again, our students are a little bit limited how much joy you'll get out of that unless they go to the loft or have a drone or what have you, or watch presentations or do research. We hope to promote some biodiversity. We're very eager to find out what's up there and to see who is up there besides our plants. Just as a contrast, okay, this is an example of an intensive green roof. This picture was taken in 2019. This is in Copenhagen, Denmark, and it won the most innovative green roof structure for 2019. And what I find is kind of interesting about this is a green roof on top of a waste facility. This is where they're managing, they call it resource management, but this is their waste facility. How are they dealing with waste? But they've turned it into a park, basically. I mean, what you have, and I just highlighted three things. Obviously, you have the green here. You can ski on this. They have people going down in skis or kind of plastic intended to go on grasses. All right, you can hike all along here, and there's hiking coming up here. And then over here, what's not maybe as obvious now, but this is actually a climbing wall. So they've, especially the Scandinavian countries, have taken a lot of advantage of turning some of these novel ideas into something that's people-friendly and environmental friendly.
All right, so like we said, we are interested in knowing what's up there. So we're interested in knowing what plant species are there. I'm learning a lot about sedums myself. I didn't have any idea how much diversity there is amongst sedums. So there are a bunch of pictures there of different kinds of sedum, and you can see that just visually they look very different. So that's kind of cool. We're also interested in knowing what might be taking advantage of those plants up there. So when we were up there yesterday, I did see one insect. I caught a very brief glimpse of it, so I don't know what it was. And then as I was walking into the building this morning, I saw some bees pollinating a tree outside. So the insects are active, and so we might be looking for a student who would maybe do some biodiversity kind of surveys this summer. What kind of fungi might be up there? We could do soil samples and find out what kinds of microorganisms are in the soil. We can see if there are any small mammals that have made their way up there. I wouldn't be surprised at all if a squirrel has climbed up there. I don't know if the squirrel would find anything palatable or not, but be interesting to see. And here we are back to the picture of the sedum. And in case you were trying to read this earlier, we put it upside down so that it would kind of match the view that we had. So if you've not been able to read it, that's probably partly why. But we're just showing it to you to kind of show what was there, and we're going to see if we can figure out what has survived. And so like Teresa talked about, there are 5 different groups of sedum plants that they put in. And I think we've kind of already talked about that. But we can see visual differences. And so what we mean by phenotype here is the appearance of the plant. And so I talked a little bit about the differences in leaves. So that's one thing to look at. And then we can also look at genetic differences. And I think Dr. DeGolier is going to talk about this slide.
Yeah, we thought this would be a great project for a student is look at the genotype, because there are techniques, and this schematic here kind of tells you what's going on, where you would need to take some of the plant leaves, chop it up. You want to extract out some of the genes that are in the chloroplast. And then you can use a bunch of molecular techniques, amplify what you have through PCR, have those segments sequence this DNA, and then you send them off to a bioinformatics group, which hopefully has the genetic code for given species of sedum. We do not yet know if we can find someone who's already done the genome for sedum. But that way we can identify for sure what is up here. So this will be a great project for a student because we can actually do this at Bethel. We've done this with a number of other organisms at Bethel, and we send it off for analysis, but the actual collection of the DNA and the preparing it for the sequencing is something our students can be involved in. And perhaps once we get a little better sense of who's really here, will we see any hybridization going on? Have no idea. Some of the species that are planted are already hybrids. So we know they can be hybridized, but we don't know who's here. And if we get some very odd things coming back from our analysis, there'll be certainly things for us to think about.
One thing that's interesting with sedum is that it is a succulent, and so it likely does a type of photosynthesis called crassulacean acid metabolism, also known as CAM. One of those long terms that is just easier to say the CAM, like BMBB. Anyway, so all plants do the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is the part of the photosynthesis reaction that actually incorporates the carbon dioxide molecule into an organic molecule. So you've probably learned that plants make their own food. You probably learned that when you were in 7th grade or so. What they're actually doing is they're making food out of thin air. They're building carbon dioxides into sugars. And so this is the part of the reaction that actually does it, the Calvin cycle. And the enzyme the most important enzyme in the world, because it provides food for everybody, is this enzyme called rubisco, ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase. Another one of those big terms. It's easier just to say rubisco. So this enzyme has both carboxylase activity, which is how it's adding the carbon dioxide into a sugar, but it also has oxygenase activity, which is when it, instead of adding a carbon dioxide into an existing sugar, it adds an oxygen. This is considered to be a wasteful process. It doesn't do the plant any good. It's actually called photorespiration. So plants have evolved mechanisms to avoid doing photorespiration. One of them is called C4 photosynthesis, where there's an initial fixation of the carbon into malic acid, which is then stored in the plant. And then it's transferred closer into the veins of the plant in cells that are called bundle sheath cells. And then the Calvin cycle happens further inside. So this is just a way of concentrating the carbon dioxide closer to where the Calvin cycle is happening. So it makes the carboxylation reaction more likely. So C4 plants include corn. Corn is a C4 plant. It's a type of photosynthesis that increases the it makes the plant more water use efficient. So corn grows like crazy on hot, humid days when there's plenty of water and it can photosynthesize away. It doesn't do so well on cooler days, and C3 plants that just do the Calvin cycle, they do a little bit better. So sedum as a succulent is probably a CAM plant, and so it is probably capable of separating out this C4 part of its cycle and doing that part of its cycle at nighttime and only opening up the stomata, which are the little pores that allow CO2 to come in the leaves. Most plants keep their stomata open during the daytime because that's when they are also exposed to the light, and that's when they're doing photosynthesis. But CAM plants, what they do is they open their stomates at night, they fix a bunch of CO2 as malic acid, and that's why they have thick leaves, because they store a bunch of these organic acids in their leaves. And then in the daytime, that malic acid breaks down, provides CO2 to the Calvin cycle, and that's when they're actually making their sugars. So this is an inefficient way of doing photosynthesis. It's slow, but these kinds of plants can survive in really dry conditions. So it's likely that the sedum is a CAM plant, and it would be interesting to kind of measure when it's doing CAM photosynthesis and when it's just doing C3 photosynthesis. And we can do that by measuring CO2 exchange rates during the day and the night. And we could probably also collect a leaf and have some biochemist analyze it to see whether there's malic acid in there. We'll be hiring Troy to come back and do this work. Anyway, so I just kind of geeked out about photosynthesis there for a minute, but that's one possible research project that a student could get into. And then soil.
All right, we'd like to look at the soil, and there's actually two slides. The first one are the abiotic factors, would be the non-living things, and then the biotic factors would be the living things in the soil. So I'll focus on the abiotic factors. Most greenhouse soils are engineered. Again, ours was a proprietary blend from Bachman's, and Josh Girth, who's just walked in from Grounds, has tried to get them to release their recipe so we could analyze it, but that's their business. So we'll be taking a look at it in a microscope and see what we learn. But it is different from your typical loam ratios, which are used in agriculture. And again, as we kind of implied earlier, it's intended to be lightweight, and it's intended to provide good water drainage. I think I said absorption earlier, good water drainage to allow for the water to collect in that reservoir rather than, creating an environment for mold or something like that. So it is a specially made mixture of soil and inorganic materials, crushed clay and perlite. That is supposedly a picture of that. We have not looked at the soil yet. We're just giving a little time for the plants to get a hold of themselves, and then we'll probably take a sample, look under a microscope, and see what we see. Josh had made a comment earlier that when they put in the plant structures, that the soils had kind of like a crystalline structure in there. We're kind of wondering what that was. You know, what was part of that proprietary soil? You know, our best guess right now is that was probably some sort of little package of fertilizer. But we don't know. We'll see if we have finding of that residual left over. This would be still a great opportunity for labs to be involved, because we do have a number of courses where we analyze soil, looking at particular minerals like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and the amount of humus in the soil, its ability to retain water. But it isn't the same soil that you find in your potting plants or in your garden.
As far as soil biodiversity, one thing that we have done in some of our introductory freshman classes is we have isolated bacteria from soil samples. And so this is a kind of you've heard of crowdsourcing maybe. This is a student sourcing way of hopefully finding some new antibiotics. So the Integrative Biology, Gene, Cells, and Change course taught by Dr. Paula Sunneral. Her students have collected soil samples from various places on campus. They've isolated bacterial colonies from them, and when you grow the colonies, sometimes there ends up being a zone of inhibition that indicates that there is some antibiotic activity. So the goal here is to look for antibiotics. And so maybe that class would want to do some analysis of the soil that's on the green roof. Maybe they would find something interesting up there. Who knows?
And then briefly, we did get some funding to buy a weather station. It's not up yet because the funding's not available till June. But we thought it might be nice, as this project and research program grows, to try to correlate some of what we find with weather conditions, particularly when we look at things like rainfall, wind direction, wind chill, etc. You know, is there anything going on with the results of the other projects that maybe could be correlated with weather?
Let's see. So we've just kind of come up with questions as we've been wandering around on the green roof. And one of them is that we noticed that some species of sedum are kind of not coloring within the lines. And so some of these sedums have kind of jumped over the boundary, and they're growing out here in the gravel. So we're just wondering why. So that's just kind of one question we have. We have noticed some color changes. We're trying to understand the color and whether that has to do with the substrate that they're growing on. Sometimes it seems like the ones that jump over the line and they grow in the gravel, they have a different color when they're out on the gravel than they do in the other soil. So we're kind of wondering about that. Like we said, there's some patches where most of the sedum seems to be dead. So we want to try to understand what caused that. And we're hoping with some of the things we learn about our green roof to be able to contribute something to the environmental science community and contribute to future design of green roofs, like maybe which species do well, which species don't. And I'm guessing as students get up there on the roof, they might come up with other questions that we haven't thought about. So that pretty much concludes our presentation. In this picture, you can see that skylight, and so that gives you a little bit of orientation. If you're interested in taking a look at the green roof, you can see it from the loft, from the windows in the loft. You can see out onto the green roof. And if you're really nice, maybe one of us would take you out there. Thank you for your attention.
And if you want to stay and ask questions, you're welcome. We can see if we can field. A lot of what we're proposing has not been done, but it's setting up a research program to take advantage of this green roof while it's here. Well, not that it's going anywhere, but you know, it's a site waiting to be studied. Bill.
so many good questions here. I mean, this stuff starts bubbling up, doesn't it? So in addition to bacteria and insects, I'd be curious to know if there's, you know, a detritivore population up there. I've got sedum at home. I love sedum. It's one of my favorite kinds of plants. But do they give off enough organic material to keep detritivores up and going, like, you know, little tater bugs or things like that? If so, how the heck do they get up there?
Yeah.
You know?
So the question was, do we know if there are detritivores up there, like little tater bugs? And if there are, how they got there? I would guess that they would get there by flying, if they are up there. And I would guess
Tater bugs aren't aerial.
Are they cyst in somebody's feces?
I don't know. I'd be curious because they're purely terrestrial little critters.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, if they were in the initial mix that got up there, that would be one way. And so that sounds like a possible project to see what might be up there feeding on the decomposing remains of any sedum that die. And I mean, anything that's alive is going to leave some detritus that can be consumed by a detritivore. So, and it might just end up being bacteria that do the job. Yep. Other questions?
Maybe I can ask Josh a question. Have you ever seen mold up here?
Not that I recall. Moss, yes, but mold, not that I recall.
Do you know from your involvement in this, was moss ever intentionally part of the plantings?
No, it was not, to my knowledge.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was not intentional.
We didn't think so, but
And honestly, I haven't been up there this year, but I'm assuming there's some in that back corner where it overhangs on the east side.
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit of moss.
swirls, almost patterns. It's replacing something, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some of the plants that get really big, shade out what's underneath, and then end up with some moss in those areas too.
I was going to see if we're getting any comments on the chat. Oh, yeah.
Sarah Wise asks, I'm really curious about the moss. Could it be the moss are helping with water retention? Could you explore areas with high-low moss for differences in water retention? I would hypothesize the moss are really critically important in the green roof ecosystem.
Yeah, so the question, did you have your sound on so they could hear that? So the question had to do with the moss and the role that the mosses are playing, and are they important for water retention? I will just say again that I was really surprised to see so much moss up there, because you usually see moss in shaded areas, and we're seeing a lot of it like right out, kind of exposed. And so I surmise that the design of the roof is just retaining enough moisture that it keeps those mosses alive. And I'll be really interested to see through the summer if that moss stays really active, or if it just kind of goes dormant. I don't know if I addressed all of that. I'm not sure how to find the chat on here. Yeah, so we asked Josh if he had seen any mold, and he doesn't remember seeing any. Do you remember ever seeing any mushrooms up there?
I don't recall. Yeah.
Yeah, so what was the other thing besides mushrooms? Earthworms. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if there are earthworms, and again, I'm not sure how they would get up there, but it would be interesting to see if there are any up there, or any kind of worms. It'll be really interesting to see what kind of invertebrates are living up there, and I'm sure there's something.
Yeah, I would think
And
so.
I think we'll just have to get down on our hands and knees and crawl around and dig around in the dirt a little bit and see what's living there. Maybe take samples, bring them back to the lab.
I think
So-
we have to keep in mind, if this has been running for 13 years, how much of the plant's biomass has now become soil, and so that propriety blend is no longer the same ratio. So now that's
Yeah.
going to support a whole different set of organisms, I think.
Absolutely.
Richard Peterson says, do you know of other green roofs in the Twin City area that are playing a role in stormwater management?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Do we know what's going on other green roofs? And I have not looked into that. Have you looked into that at all?
Me either, not here, other than I think if we build a parking lot, I think we could have a big green roof up there. You know, a ramp, okay, you know. No, I haven't checked. I do think Minneapolis and St. Paul have green roofs, but I don't know what they've done with them, what types they are, but
Yeah, great question, and that's something that we do need to do a little bit more research on, is what is going on in our area. Yep.
but there are people that have, I mean, not really that different from this, are sod houses,
Oh, right.
you know.
So yeah, green roof technology has been around ever since the pioneers were building sod houses. Yep. Or living in, you know, on the banks of Plum Creek and in that dugout. That was a green roof.
And then if you do start looking around, I found too, when you do some hits on green roof, you get people with solar panels because it's green economically, that type of thing. So
Yeah, my next project is I want to put solar panels on the Great Hall. On the Great Hall. I think it'd be a perfect site for them.
So Sarah came back with thinking about peat mosses, referring back to the moss question. They're in really sunny habitat.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know
So,
what's that.
Dr. Wise, we need to get you in on this project. So, yeah, we need to collaborate with and think about, we can use your expertise on these peat mosses.
but it's not squishy up there. So unlike a bog, you know,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I think it's not very deep and it's not squishy. At least it hasn't. I mean, we're walking right across the sedum right now. I mean, it's a very robust plant.
Were
But
you
would
able
it
to hear
be-
that, Sarah?
But it's a good question.
Yeah, so Dr. DeGolier pointed out that it's not squishy up there. It's not like permafrost, but the whole design of the green roof does retain water. But it's true, as we walk across it, it's not squishy. But there must be a lot of water retained there. But yeah, Dr. Wise, I want to talk to you about what you know about mosses and how that could relate to what's happening here.
Were there any other intermediate studies done at all between the origination and now? That's quite a gap of time.
Yeah, as far as the question was, have there been any intermediate studies since the green roof was established and this year? And as far as we know, nobody's done anything with the green roof. So we're just now saying, hey, we got a green roof. Let's take advantage of it.
I think there was initial interest, but it just didn't move forward at the time. And then, you know, people get busy and other things happen, and suddenly it kind of came to our attention again with the most recent science building. We had been up there looking at progress, and someone went, hey, do we still have the green roof? Because we're looking out and thinking like, wow, you know, it's time to see what we can pull together after 13 years of letting it become established.
Yep.
Thanks everybody for being here. Oh, Bill, yeah.
One more question and let you run. So seeing as we've got a number of different sedums, do they get along and play well with each other? You know, contact inhibition, competition kind of thing? Do you know?
Yeah.
Some plants get kind of nasty and engage in chemical warfare to keep. You know, I'm just wondering. You know, concerning what they started, have boundaries been set and lines crossed? And
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of part of what we've noticed is, I can see back on this. Part of what we've noticed is that we're not exactly seeing the same patterns. We're kind of seeing this same swirl that was at least intended, but some of what we're seeing is kind of different. So if we could go back to this slide, it does seem like certain species have kind of taken over certain areas. And so it seems like, as you said, there's been some competitive exclusion. So there seems to have been some winners and some losers. And we're kind of interested in figuring out who the winners are, because they'd be good for future green roofs.
Just yesterday, we were trying to stare at these and go, because we've got a key for some sedum, and because we know what 15 species were planted. So we think we identified 3 or 4 that we think, but again, they've emerged. They're not to full form yet, but we did notice, based on where they're planted and what we see now, that there's a hybrid coral carpet, sedum something coral carpet, which is doing really, really well, and it's growing everywhere. So it makes me think that they are not playing within the lines, and they're doing well to the, either because they've inhibited contact with others, or somebody else just did not take well after a year. So a lot of those questions are just ripe for the collection. That's a great question. Yep.
Yep.
So it'd be kind of fun to, I mean, hopefully we get some students engaged in this in the next year or two. We should be able to start addressing some of these questions and actually see what's going on in here. But we do think it's a healthy roof. I mean, there's stuff thriving up there. But it does change, and we did not necessarily expect it to stay static.
And I would say along with that, like some of it is, I wish we had better records, because there was years where after a winter, some of the varieties didn't come out of the winter as well. So maybe that might have been part of it. And then some of it, I think the taller varieties have shaded out some of the other varieties too. But also we don't have great records. And then there was early on, after the first or second year, there was a small replanting effort in some of the thin areas, and I don't have the records on what plugs we used either. So that would contribute to some of the diversity and the difference between the 2009 installation and the future years. But again, I don't have good records.
No, but no time like the present to get started.
So for those watching online, that was Josh Girth just, no, it's all right, just talking about wishing that we had a little bit better records of what's been winter killed and what's, there was a small replanting early on in some places that were thin. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you if you were watching online, and have a great day.
Yay.